So thank you for being back with us. And Anara, Vera, I'm glad you could both come today. Good to see you both. And of course, to see our students as well. People are still coming in, but we're going to jump right in and get started. This is the third and last of the interviews that David Katzmeyer, our tech consultant, is doing with Rita. He's done a terrific job and they've been fascinating. And today is about Rita's poetry. Um, I put the note in group chat. If you have questions, comments, please write just to me, and I think we'll get to everything. And David, I turn it over to you. Thanks as always for being here. And of course, Rita. Mwah! Rita, you need to unmute. Won't do much good if you're muted. Okay.
Thank you, Judy, and welcome back to another session. Today, we are going to be embarking upon the prose and poetry of our own Rita Satz on the board of directors for the Center of Learning and Living. Rita has agreed to let us interview her, ask her about some of her poems, and you may even hear a couple of them. We have a couple of excerpts from two interviews that were done with Rita at CUNY. Very nice interviews. So we're going to play a couple of clips from that and then bring up some poems. Rita Satz, thank you for joining us today.
I'm poetry savvy and technology inept.
That's all right. Delegate that so that poetry may reach the masses. Well, Rita, I have a definition here on prose versus poetry. Well, I looked it up and I got this sentence. It says, prose is a straightforward, natural form of writing found in everyday speech and common formats like novels and essays, while poetry uses structure like rhyme, rhythm, and intentional line breaks to create an artistic expression. Rita, how would you classify, if you will, the writings that you have published in the realm of prose versus poetry?
I sort of have to disagree with that. For me, poetry is speaking. It's if I gave thought to format and composition, I don't think I could write the poem. I think it's if it's in you, and I didn't know it was, it's sort of a natural expression of what you want to say.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you, partly out of my own curiosity, when you write, is it something that is a stream consciousness, spontaneous flow of writing? Or do you write and then go back over it like a Bach cantata?
It's it, it's both. I think the original writing, or whatever spurred it, is a stream of consciousness. But then you go back over it to find a better word, to find a better rhythm. Sometimes, sometimes you leave it alone. I can't explain it, but I think you know when you've written it whether it said what you wanted it to or didn't.
Rita, you've had illustrious careers, one that started working with a congressman and in politics, and then your rather well-known career in journalism with NBC and even producing some things for CNN. It spanned many years and produced many important and meaningful documentaries and so forth. Then you turned to poetry after you had successful professional careers. If this isn't a difficult question, may I ask, what was it that prompted you to go to writing?
Actually, it turns out to be fairly simple. When I stopped working, I went to CLNL and was taking classes there. I taught there, but I also took classes. One of my classes was a poetry class, And Naomi Chase, who was a very good poet with lots of published books, was teaching a small class, very small. And one of our assignments was to write a poem. And I wrote a poem and brought it back the next week. And she said, Rita, you're a poet. And I said, no, I wrote a poem. She said, no, you're a poet. And she persuaded me to send poems. I started writing more then, of course. And when I had written a lot of them, which were spurred by that first poem, she asked me to send them to her publisher. And I demurred, but finally did. And lo and behold, he published them. And lo and behold, I was a poet.
Well, part of what you said reminds me of what I heard in one of these nice interviews. We have two interviews that CUNY wanted to do with you. Rita, if I may, I'd like to play one of them now. It may preempt some of the questions that are in our minds about your works. Let me do a share screen.
I'm curious myself.
Okay, here we go.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Having your first book of poetry published is an accomplishment. Writing your first book of poetry when you're a great-grandmother might be considered amazing. But for Rita Satz, it's really not that surprising because, as she says, she's never started anything she knew how to do, and she was never afraid to try. Welcome.
Thank you.
So are you surprised at all the appreciation of your poetry?
I'm astonished. I think the one I surprised the most was myself. I really never wrote poetry. And to write your first poem when you're 91, I guess, and have it published when you're 92 is a little bit weird. I'm not a student of poetry, really. I think there are people who are really students. I read poetry. And I like it, but I never thought of writing. It never occurred to me. The only reason I wrote the poetry is after I stopped working I was a producer at NBC News for over 20 years.
We're going to talk a lot about what you did.
When I stopped, I took some other jobs, and when I stopped working altogether, I was looking for something to do, and I started taking courses at it's a education institution, nonprofit called the Center for Learning and Living, right here on 68th Street.
You're now a board member, right?
I became a board member right away. And I started to teach. I taught for 20-odd years, and I taught inside TV news. Everybody likes to go backstage, so, we did all that. And then I stopped teaching a few years ago because my voice isn't so good and it's getting to be a little onerous. And I take classes also. And I persuaded a good friend of both of ours, Naomi Chase, who is a wonderful poet, to do a workshop. And she didn't really want to do it, but she did it. And she said she would teach a workshop, a poetry workshop for about 8 people. And I thought, oh, God, now I have to take it. I realized. And I did. And after I wrote 3 or 4 poems, Naomi said to me, Rita, you're a poet. And I said, no, I'm writing poems. You're a poet. And she said, no, you're a poet. And she convinced me, and somehow I got the feeling of putting my emotions into poetry. I don't know where it came from, Ronnie. It's very hard for me to explain. And of course, the other shock was when I sent it to a publisher. And to me, that was like, it was like putting it in a bottle and going to the end of the ocean and sending it out to sea in the Atlantic. Nothing is going to come of this.
And I wondered if it's the first time in your professional life, and you've had a great one, and we're going to talk about it, that it really came not so much from thinking, but really from your heart and just your memory.
Absolutely. The first poem I wrote was called The Park at the River, and I thought what I was doing was describing going down and sitting and reading and watching the nurses and the people in wheelchairs. I thought it was a descriptive poem. But the last line was, I had to look through the bushes at the flowers to see the river, and they were forsythia and roses and plants I didn't know the name of because I hadn't planted them. And that line was what started me as a poet, because that was an emotion that I was putting into the poem that I didn't know that's what I was writing about. I wasn't writing about the river. I was writing about the loss of my old life.
And you write about your family and
Yeah.
and your husband who died, what,
Yeah.
7, 8 years ago?
Yeah.
Is that right? You got married very early during the Second World War.
World War II, yeah. I was all of 19.
19. Isn't that amazing?
Well, this is Hands, it's called.
Okay.
It cups my elbow lightly, balancing me across the street, the hand that's light, firm, trying to say, you don't need me, I know, but I'm here. Did my hand feel light, firm when I took his small one in mine to walk him across the street, through traffic, through life? When was the moment he knew, I knew, he didn't need my hand, didn't want it, needed to swing his arms freely, uncurl his fingers. Now we take each other's hands because we want to.
So lovely. So now let me hear the other poem, which
the-
is
the
really
oth-
about the
other one
family.
is the
Yeah.
title of the book, really. There's such strong memories, the ones I can still feel in my body. The children running into my arms, slamming themselves against my stomach, wrapping arms around my waist or neck, even if we've been apart for just a little while. My husband, looking up from his book as I open the door, his serious face when he says with relief, there you are, although I'm not late. My mother, grabbing my hands tight enough to hurt, relieved that I'm there, the there where I appear every single week. Doesn't matter. What would life be like if no one was ever afraid that you wouldn't come back?
That's so lovely.
So we're both fortunate
Yeah.
that it does go with the other poem in a way, because those same people who
Right.
needed us now want us to need them.
Well, Rita, does that interview bring back some memories?
It does. Uh, actually made me a little emotional. But Ronnie was a very good interviewer, and just I talked too much, I think. But I certainly was. If I were to do that interview today, I would do exactly the same answers. These poems are about holding on in a way, and a lot of them are in the last line. Because they're remembrances.
One of the poems we may look at here today tells of a conversation you had with your daughter that seems to touch on that subject as well. But before we continue, I just want to make sure we haven't prompted any questions yet. Does anybody have any questions at this point before we go on? Hear from Judy.
Okay, now you can hear from Judy. Well, a couple questions actually. Why did you want to express those thoughts? And that your thoughts come through very strongly, I think, but why did you want to express them through poetry rather than prose?
I don't know, because I look how old I was when I first did express them through poetry. So it was clearly not something that was always within me. It was not that it was latent and I was trying to bring it out. It was that I didn't know it was there. I wrote a lot, but it never occurred to me to. And I like to read poetry, but I can't say that I was a great lover of poetry. I mean, there are people who really read practically nothing else. I don't know where it came from, except that I found somehow, I think by doing it from the side and rather than confronting it directly, I was able to talk about emotions that otherwise I wouldn't have shared.
Interesting. The other question I wanted to ask is, a lot of you, I think, come to Barry Wallenstein's classes on poetry, which are really, really terrific. And he often says we shouldn't ask what a poem means. And yet the poems that you've mentioned, and I've read your book, to me, the meaning does come through. And I was just wondering if you agree with that we shouldn't be thinking about what a poem means or ask what it means.
I think he's talking about reading it, and I'm not sure. I think you almost have to say what it means, but that's not necessarily an intellectual thing. It can be an emotional thing. What it means to you emotionally, what it evokes in you, whether the fact that I'm very often writing about loss or at the stage when I'm realizing what I had. If that evokes that same emotion in you, I don't know that that's trying to read something into it. I think that's either a natural reaction or not. You may not respond to it at all. But I'm sure that there are people who read my poems who don't respond to them or respond to one another.
Thank you.
Most certainly. And poetry is an art. And I've heard art described as creating something that allows the viewer, the reader, the listener to feel what you are feeling when you created it. And Rita, when I read your poems, I'm transfixed. I'm sitting in the park or I'm on a hill overlooking the sea and the sand, and I am in the moment. I am nowhere else. Time stands still. And you know what? I think everybody else feels the same way when they read it. And that may be why you were surprised by it catching on. You have a universal appeal because you reach to that which is common to us all, because you recognize it in yourself. It takes one to know one, Rita, and your love and your presence comes through because it reaches a part of what is in all of us.
Well,
So
if
no,
you're trying to make me weak, David, you're succeeding. That's a lovely thing to say.
I owed you that.
That's lovely things to say. Thank you. Thank you. And two of my former co-workers, I understand, are here, Miguel and Honora, and both of them are creative in many ways. And I think my form of expression I discovered very late in life is through poetry. I think they know that there are other forms of expression as you start to get older that are just asking to come out and need somebody to open the door.
Well said. Well said. Earlier, you mentioned that some of the poems are about hanging on. Your poems cover on so many subjects. But on that, I like to bring up one of your poems that came to mind when you said that. Let me share screen here. And this, of course, is from the book There You Are, available on Amazon by Rita Satz. That's right, you too can own your copy. And the poem this reminded me of is a clear screen. It is My Daughter Bought Me an Orchid. Let me move this bar down here and open that. And Rita, if I dare, I may take a go at reading this for you. My daughter bought me. Very good. Thank you, Rita. My daughter bought me an orchid. My daughter bought me an orchid plant. We were both pleased. Set it on a low table, stood back to admire it, but I'm leery of orchids. Everyone says they last for months. Mine don't. The blossoms droop. The buds they say will open won't. My daughter says, you give them too much care. Leave them alone. Don't feed them. A little water every few weeks, only when they get dry and say they need it. They'll tell you if they want help. I said, I understood. I do. Now I know what it's like to be a parent. And I thought I knew what it was like to be a parent because I had cats, but I didn't until I read that.
uh, it's interesting, David, because a lot of my poems, I think, are revealed in the last line. And I think I said, I think I understood. I do. Of course, is a relation to the fact that I realized that my daughter was saying, stop fussing over me, leave me alone. I'll be okay. You've done your job, which was in that last line. But I think I said I understood. I did. And so I think I came at a lot of these poems sideways, which is what I think maybe poetry sometimes is. Instead of saying directly what it is,
then the metaphor becomes clear by the end. And
you hope.
Yes. Well, it does. It does in so many that I've read. Did you give that poem to your daughter after you wrote it?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
She understood perfectly.
Oh, well, of course. Of course. Well, we're covering poems in two books. One is There You Are on Amazon and Back to the Park. And that's one of the ones that put me right there in a place. And well, can we go over to the lead poem of your book, Back to the Park? I'll bring that up if I may.
Can I just tell you that Back to
Yes,
the
ma'am.
Park
Yeah.
was an emotional poem for me. We
Yes.
had just sold our home in Westchester that we used to live in full time, and then we were just going to weekends while we were spending more and more time in New York. And when I walked, I used to love to garden. So this first poem that I wrote, that Naomi responded to, she evidently saw right away that what I was writing about was not the park by the river, but what I had left behind and not being able to garden at my home anymore, the loss of that life.
It's almost like dream interpretation because things happen in our dreams, but we manifest them.
That's true.
We can't always take them at face value, yet they allow us to experience and express in the activity of our mind the very thing that means so much, that we feel so much about. And if you manage to get that across in a poem, you're succeeding in what a dream could do for a person. So it might seem. Well, we have a bit of context for this poem, the lead poem in Back to the Park. Why don't I bring that up on the screen, if we may, Rita? And again, I will attempt to read, Rita, Back to the Park. I went back to the park today, the park by the river. I went to for green when we moved to the gray. The strollers were still there, with nannies to push them, and wheelchairs, walkers, but the trees, swelled up and stuffed with leaves, and bunches of flowers, unruly bushes spilling with color. Why did I stay away so long? Missing spring, back to the park, having summer, erasing the walk to the river. It's hard to walk there now, lurching on the cane I lean on. I'll go back tomorrow or the next day. Wow.
Well, that's
David,
getting
can you
old.
leave that on the screen?
Oh, yes, yes, ma'am, I can, certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead, Rita.
I I just wanted to say that's getting old. That's recognition of your leaving behind what you used to have.
And you have in your subsequent book, there you are, you had many poems with that theme there, talking about being older. And there's some in there. And one of them I have set aside for today. But you really touch. And for people who are young, they they know that we have the process of getting old, but they really have no imagination, no identification with what it's like getting old. So you put a person in a position to see your perspective as you reflect back and look where you are now. And sometimes you succeed in doing that both at the same time in a single stanza or even in a single phrase,
Mm.
and help us identify.
I have a question for you, Rita,
Yes,
unless you comment on what David said. I don't mean to interfere with it.
I'm
It's
done.
interesting when you use capitalization, which you did for spring in the poem itself. Spring, back to the park, which of course is the title, and then summer. And what significance does that have? I mean, everything you do is intentional, so.
I hate to tell you, Judy, I don't know.
It's as good a reason as any.
I have to be honest with you. I really don't. It's the way I wrote it, and it came naturally to me that way, but it had no significance.
Yeah, usually it's to say something's important, so.
I know,
I
but
guess,
I could lie a little bit.
I don't know.
Rita, sometimes when you take us to different venues in some of your poems, do you sometimes actually write them on location? I mean, did you sometimes go out with a pad and pencil and write while you're there, or did you have the experience, reminisce, and then write about it?
Never wrote anywhere but at my desk.
Okay, wow. And you take us on a journey when you
There,
do.
a lot of them, they're sensual memories too. When I used to visit a friend at Cape Cod a lot, and I've always loved the ocean and sand. And as I wrote these poems, I would really feel my feet walking along the ocean's edge, that lovely feeling of, or you may not think it's lovely, but I always loved walking for miles along the ocean's edge. And I think the sensuous part of that may have come through the poems, but was never deliberate in the wording. I think it came out of it rather than I put it into it, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense to me because I was sitting in a park that I may have never visited, and I sat on a hill overlooking a view of an ocean from an angle from which I never saw it. So it makes perfect sense to me. And I could feel the wind. I could hear the wind. I could see the waves. I could feel the altitude as I looked down.
Mhm.
Makes sense to me, Rita. All right, moving on. Before we do, anybody have any questions? Let's ask. Okay. So you mentioned the sand in the sea. That's kind of a segue to another poem in here where you mentioned the sand in the sea. Uh, so, oh yes, let's see. Oh yeah. I'm going to bring this up now. I had fancied maybe leaving it for the last, but I'm going to bring it up now because you touched upon it, and it's called Quiet by Rita Satz. Quiet. I listen for it when I leave the city for Carol's house that sits high on a hill looking at the sea and the sand. I listen for the sound of quiet, not silence, not an absence of sound. I hear the trees move, the sands shift, the waves curl. The city shouts to me. I shut my ears. Too much to hear. The quiet whispers, and I listen. That's one of my favorite ones, dear Rita.
Thank you. Uh, I felt that poem very much when I wrote it. Excuse me, I'm so sorry about my voice.
Yes.
Those, I was fortunate enough to have a good friend who lived at the Cape. And whenever I went up there, it was such a refuge. I grew up in the city. I grew up at 67th Street in Central Park West. So it's not that I was a city girl. But even so, I missed the serenity. And that's hard to find in the city.
Does not one have to go and listen to the quiet in order to write poetry in the first place, Rita?
I don't know. I don't know.
So you have a true spontaneity. Yeah.
I think so many of my poems relate to my life either in gardens or by the sea. That perhaps you do have to experience them, but on the other hand, I write about making soup. So I'm not. I think there are people who write poetry. I still can't call myself a poet, but a person who writes poetry, I think all of us must get, or maybe not all of us, but some of us get our impetus for writing the poem. I hesitate to use the word inspiration, from different sources. And mine may come from different places. Other poets.
And many from memory, yes?
Yeah, a lot from memory, a lot from memory. Well, when you get to be, well, I wrote this in my 90s, when I was 90. By the time you're 90, you have a lot of memories.
Mm.
Yes, you do.
David, Karen wanted to comment. Go ahead, Karen.
Yes, leave the poem up just for a second, David.
Yes,
Rita,
ma'am.
so many of your poems, the final two lines sometimes seem contradictory, but the orchid one, and then you have this one, the quiet whispers, and I listen. I think it's almost a signature of your poetry, because I've seen it when we discussed your poems in Barry's class, and it just seems a summing up that, and it's often unexpected. You get a little twist there at the end. I wonder, are you consciously doing that, or is it just something that?
No, but you're right.
About your poetry.
I'm not, but you're right. There was a poem I shared with you before about the girl on the boardwalk with a boy
guy was looking at her. Yes.
And the last line is, and sometimes I wonder, what if I had turned around?
Right.
I think that's symbolic is too pretentious a word, but I think that's true of a lot of my poems, Karen, that you saw, that it comes down to the last word. It's true in Old Friends. The last line is not a surprise to me, but it just comes naturally. It's what I've been writing about the whole poem.
Okay.
But there's a final thrust there at the end that, and that I've noticed in so many of your poems. You could tell that I taught high school English, right? And here it is again. And I think it's great because it leaves the reader with that final thought that you wanted to convey.
Thank
And
you.
I think it's great.
It does. It
You
certainly
couldn't have
does.
said anything that pleased me more. Thank you.
So Nora also wanted to come into the conversation. Go ahead, Nora.
And
I
Nora,
was-
who was a very good writer.
Yeah, but not of poetry. I've always found it difficult to even read poetry because I'm a fast reader and you can't read poetry quickly. And I also often don't get, sometimes it's so elusive, I find yours very accessible, Rita. And I wanted to ask you, and very accessible, but not in any way simple, very
Simple as all right.
yeah, but yeah, not easy, let's say. They're direct and emotional, and it's great. I really enjoy reading them. I want to get the second book. I think I've only got the first book.
Oh, dear.
So my question is, when you sit down to write a poem, kind of when I write a news story, I sort of know already what, order things are going to go in. Do you know that already, or have you thought about it ahead of time, or do you make any, I mean, not that you make an outline, but do you have any, like, what kind of where you want to get to? And secondly, does it just flow and you just write it and you get to it, or do you then go back and edit it and maybe move this line here or change this line a little bit? I'm curious about your process there.
Both, Nora. Some poems almost seem to write themselves.
Mhm.
Others, I know what it is that, or maybe I don't know, but something has given me an impetus to write it. Maybe it snowed that day or it rained that day. I think an example is City Rain, when I was aware of the fact that the rain in the country was so different from rain in the city.
That's true.
And I might edit, but usually it seems to not, I can't say write itself. I would certainly, there are usually at least 2 or 3 versions, or a searching for a word that didn't come to me the first time and suddenly it does. But I very often, I'm either, I rarely say to myself, I never say to myself, I'm going to sit down and write a poem about rain. I have to have been out in the rain and come in and a thought came to me, gee, I like walking in the rain in Scarsdale, but I don't like walking in the rain in the mud in New York. And out of that comes a poem.
So sometimes. Let's go to Susan Fish. Come on in, Susan.
Yeah, my question was just answered. I was just going to say that Rita's poems just flow so beautifully that I was going to just ask her if she does a lot of editing and changing it, because it just looks like she sat down and this was Rita talking and it came right out. But she answered the question that sometimes she does make some changes, but it's still, they flow beautifully, Rita. It's just
Thank you so much. And I will say, I don't want to give the impression that I just sit down and this muse flows out of me. Some of the poems I do work over time and time again. Sometimes just looking for one word. I know it's the wrong word and I know the right word is someplace. And if I'm lucky, I find it. And others come more easily. So I guess my answer to almost all your questions is I don't know.
Or
Which must be
sometimes.
very helpful.
you know a lot.
Right.
I'd
Well,
like
it's
to read-
nice. They come
Yes.
across, no, I just want to say, so I'm going to say undoctored. There's a simplicity about them that I find very appealing. Yeah. And very unpretentious. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
I think that's one of the reasons why everyone relates to it, because it's real and it's not what you think someone else will think is this or that. It's just what you feel. It relates to us. It's like the base language. I compared it to a dream once. There was a song from Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and someone pointed out one of the lyrics to me. Never forgot that once it was pointed out. It's that we all dream in the same language.
Oh, what a
And
wonderful line.
it's a beautiful line.
Mm,
And it
I wish
seems
I'd
that
said
you,
that.
I wouldn't have been surprised if you did, because it seems that you write in that style and in that language. Going back to something that you had mentioned and that Karen had asked about is how you end some of these poems, which seem to be free flowing, as Susan points out. I want to go back, share my screen, and look at this. I imagine if CLNL teacher Barry Wallenstein were here, who does those enjoyable poetry classes, he might analyze this as such that each stanza has 3 lines each
Can you
until,
make it larger? Make it larger?
beg pardon?
Can you make it larger?
Oh, yes, ma'am. So here we see a pattern in that every stanza is 3 lines, each one, until you get to the end. I'm not going to call it a punchline because it delivers so well, but on a subtle level. And then you really get the feeling of it. But you broke the pattern there. And that gives the rhythm, shall we say, a cadence. And what's interesting about that is if we go back to the previous poem we looked at, here we have the lines flowing one after another until we get to the end. And again, we have 2 lines separated by a space, delivering the meaning behind the meaning of the poem. And not only that, but in hands, which I don't have an image of right here, but that you mentioned in one of your CUNY interviews, that too had a pattern of stanzas, broken finally until you had a space followed by 2 lines. And in those last 2 lines, the meaning becomes clear. It's a beautiful style, and it's a signature of your writing, so it seems. Not in every
And
poem,
I
but
didn't recognize that.
well, we sometimes speak in unconscious rhythms. Composers sometimes compose with unconscious mathematical precision.
Mhm.
Bach would do it consciously, but other people would do it unconsciously because
Mhm.
it's there. It's in our innate. And once you recognize it, you're going to tap into it.
Mhm. Well, I did realize on rereading some of these poems, and I did before this class, that in so many of them, what I wrote the poem about was in the last line. And the rest of the poem was just building the mood that led to it. But I don't think I realized at the time that this was a pattern.
So we can look for meaning in what you're saying, but the meaning comes through the feeling, and sort of like the medium is the message, or the message is the medium. Have your pick. Oh my goodness. Any questions by anybody else before we move on?
You can move on.
Okie dokie. We had mentioned writing about aging. Well, you've got one that talks about aging for the most appropriate title of Canes.
Mm.
Canes. I don't like my cane. Makes the world see an old woman who needs help. Needs, doesn't want. How many times do I close my front door? Twice. Go back for the forgotten cane. Not forgotten, rejected. It may be different with my new cane, sent to me by a friend who watched my swaying stand, shook his head, said his cane was safer. Maybe my walk will get stronger with this gift. from a man I only know as the world does, whose voice whispered love, shouted freedom, still does. Makes me feel the experience.
Well, still doesn't, because that was Harry Belafonte.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes, my grandson was working with him, and they invited me to go to a concert at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with Harry Belafonte and his daughter and a couple of people and my grandson and me. And when I got up on my cane, Harry Belafonte said, "I don't like that, it's wobbly." And the next day, he sent my grandson out to buy the cane that I was using. I must say, I wish I could use the cane now. That all sounds very athletic to me at this point when I'm in a wheelchair.
My goodness. You know, in Barry's class, you brought in some poetry. And in his class, you did something I never even imagined. You composed a poem in AI. How's that, folks?
I did.
Yeah, you wrote a poem using AI. And you read it to us in class. Or Barry read it. I don't know. Well, actually, I don't remember which of you read it, but you composed it using AI. You're constantly going for new things, but that's not the point. That was to just segue to my question.
Yes.
Rita, do you fancy maybe doing more writing for us?
I don't think so. Who knows? Maybe after this class, I'll go into my computer or this computer, my iPad, and write a poem. But I certainly could not say to myself, "Gee, I'd like to write a poem now about that class," because it won't happen. But I also can't say with certainty that something isn't going to say to me some word, some phrase, something that came from this class that makes me want to put it down on paper. But that hasn't happened for a long time. Maybe because words, as you can tell from my speech, are more difficult to find now. Or maybe that would make them better. I don't know.
Maybe it would, but from that entire answer, I think the only part of it I heard was who knows.
Yeah.
I'll make you a deal, Rita.
Okay.
If you choose to write anything again, I will do what you recommended to me I do before the class was open and we started the beginning of today's class and recording. You made a recommendation of what I should do. If
Which
you
you
write,
don't want to reveal.
well, I'm holding it as a hold card for leverage.
Okay.
All right, I'll show my hold card. Rita, who read one of my poems. Rita, by the way, there are two people in the world who read that poem. The person who inspired me to write it, and the other one is you. Before we turned on the recording, Rita said to me that I should bring my poetry forth. I will if you will. If you choose to write again, I will follow up and I will submit my poetry to Barry Wallenstein for his approval and to see if he would accept that for part of one of his classes.
If he doesn't, I'll put it in one of mine. So don't worry.
I
Go there.
must tell you, though, that if I sit down and say I'm going to write a poem, it may be a very bad poem because I've never done that. So we'll see.
Might be,
I
and
just
might
want to,
not. Yeah.
Rita,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I just want to tell Rita, you don't come across as having trouble finding words. we hear your voice is different, but you're very articulate. I just want you to know that's how you come across.
Thank
Okay?
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very glad.
And I'm
to
being
hear it,
honest. Yeah.
because I feel very hesitant as I speak. Yeah.
No, don't worry about it. You're
I'm
really
just
fine.
used to talking too much.
Well, keep
Even if
talking.
you're working more to deliver what you say, you still deliver what you say. And it's very articulate and very on point always. So I don't feel what you're feeling when you're putting it together, but I hear what you say. And that's one of the reasons I asked that we do not one, but three interviews with you. And I think that a chance is worth taking every now and then, isn't it? Sometimes life is chances.
Yeah.
And if you might write and it might be terrible, don't submit it. So what? You're not doing it live. You're not on America's Got Talent doing a spontaneous reading. But if it meets with your satisfaction, it might surprise you.
we both Honora and McGee, who are here, are writers because they write news. I think that you said that they were in the class.
Not
So
McGee,
what-
but Anara's here. And Vera.
And I wondered whether they, as writers who write every day, ever had a temptation to write a different kind of writing.
Good timing. McGee just is entering. And McGee, if I'm going to ask Rita to repeat her question for you, and then I'm going to call on Anara. Can you repeat the question?
Well, we've been talking about writing and what inspires you to writing. The fact that I no longer feel the urge to write poetry, on the May again, and wondered whether one day you and Honora, who use words all the time, ever think you might feel an inspiration or have to put it down in another medium to sing. Well, McGee uses music and Nora uses words and dancing. So they use the arts, but you ever feel ever to write poetry?
Go ahead,
you-
Maggie.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I don't believe I'm a poet. I don't
Neither
believe
did I.
I don't believe I have a gift, the gift that you have, Rita. I mean, your poetry is so beautiful. I don't think it's a gift of mine. I love writing and I like thinking about writing, but I'm not sure I ever have the attention to focus or detail that poetry requires and the love of sounds and words. I just don't think it's what I do well, and it's clearly what you do well. How do you feel, Inara?
Well, I was going to respond to Rita also on the level of news writing, which is, we always are hemmed in by the number of words that we may use, in any given piece. And I think, the average is 150 words per, minute 30 piece, something like that. And so I would jokingly say to Gabe, we're actually engaged in a form of haiku in the news business. You have to really, shave everything down to its absolute essence. And sometimes it's oversimplified as a result, which is too bad. But, sometimes it's actually, pretty accurate. And the point is that people have to hear it. They're not reading it. So they have to be able to absorb it, as an oral experience. So, there are challenges to news writing. I've never thought about, I can barely read poetry, as I mentioned before, except for yours. But I also had another question, sort of, and I have other ambitions to write, other things. And, I wake up every morning and thinking, why don't you do that? And I haven't. Or I haven't completed anything yet. But who are the people that you would read? Do you read other poets? Do you get in, any sort of knowledge or guidance, or, do you admire any other poets?
I did growing up. I loved Edna Vincent St. Millay, and still do in her poetry. And of course, I love Dorothy Parker, who was not that simple. When you read a lot of her poetry, there's a lot of emotion hidden with not jokes, but with satire or wit or pared down. And I think that had an influence on me because I think I use words more sparingly than other poets do. But give it a try, by the way.
Well, I'm feeling a lot of the things that you express in getting older, now that I'm sort of like squarely in my mid-70s. And
You're a kid. She was in her 90s. What are you talking about?
I know, I keep trying to
It's
recall that, but
Yeah.
aging is a theme, and the loss of what you had when you were younger is something, you definitely start to feel in your 70s, maybe even earlier, depending, and I see other, people who aren't as fortunate as you to live as long and to be completely, yourself, for 100 years.
Sounds like Rita is encouraging you to write, Inara, and also McGee. And all I got to say to that is, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Why am I singing that? I'm glad you asked. You know who wrote that? Barry Manilow wrote that.
Really?
Barry Manilow was writing
Really?
commercial jingles. And then he went on and wrote magnificent love songs. Some people love them, some people don't. I like Barry Manilow. Thank you very much. And huge hits, way up there in the charts. Very, very successful, very accomplished, and everything like that. And he was writing jingles for commercials. So you say, well, I'm used to a particular kind of writing, journalism. It's a high level of writing. It's a big market. It's a pinnacle, but it's different, isn't it? Yes. And so I wonder if you were to switch gears and try and differentiate beyond your comfort zone, if you were to accept Rita's encouragement, or I dare say challenge, that you might be finding the quiet, not unlike what we found in Rita's poem. So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit biased here on the world of encouragement because I think writing is a wonderful thing. And I'll tell you what, if y'all ever read anything, I'd be a one to read it. And this all started when I did a throwdown challenge with Rita. Let's see what may become of that.
Well, I just
And
want to
we're-
remind you that
Yep.
we've got our end of season celebration a week from tomorrow. And we say if you have a joke or a poem, come on. And all of you are invited. Okay.
Way cool. Way cool. Well, on the subject of writing, we have a congregation here. Has anyone else ventured into the world of writing? And if you have, is there anything you would like to say to Rita about it?
You're talking about writing poetry or any kind of writing?
Prose or poetry specifically, not a short story, not an outline for a novel, but has anyone else taken pen to prose or poetry? Because if you did, I'd like
Go ahead, Eleanor.
Eleanor.
No, I
Your
Oh,
mic's
yeah.
off, Eleanor.
Go ahead, Karen, and then I'll go. Go ahead, Karen, you have to unmute.
I write
Okay, well,
all the time. I write poetry, I write prose, I've written several short stories, not published. I have not ventured to send them out to be published because I don't think they're published worthy. And I taught creative writing in high school for several years. And I tried to come up with, this was before prompts were popular. And I had to figure out ways to get my high school juniors and seniors to write. And I sometimes would play music and we would work, I would try to give them some impetus, but I do write. Nothing that I'm willing to share.
All right. I have heard some of your poems that you do as jokes at parties, and they're fun, but they rhyme. Have you ever tried writing poetry not rhyming?
Yeah, I write a lot in
Good.
free verse also. Yeah.
Good.
Where did you hear? You heard my poems, Rita?
No, you at CLL parties or events, sometimes you read a poem that you've written for it.
My
forgotten.
first poem that was published actually when I was in high school, and it was published in some teenage anthology. And unfortunately, I memorized it, and I will. A teenage girl has many things: the pep of youth, the poise of queens, the hopes and wishing on a star while gazing at the world afar. All these things one can see in this soon-to-be woman, in this lovely girl, this woman to be. That was published when I was 16 years old.
Wow, very nice.
That's
And you
great.
wrote that, Karen? Did you write
Yes,
that?
yes, I did not plagiarize it. Yes, I did indeed write that.
Good for you.
You've been holding out on us, babe. What if
And that was it.
maybe
That was
you'll,
my last published piece.
who knows, maybe you'll submit a poem to Barry and ask him to bring it into class because you read it well, you recite it well, it's English.
My mother wrote birthday poems for me every year till I was, I think, 13 or 14, and I made a copy and I sent them to Barry. I said, not for you to read aloud, don't feel any pressure, but I thought you might see them, and he was very impressed. I wrote a book about focus groups, but I don't think anybody here would want to read it, and I do not blame them.
Hey, y'all, before we get too far towards the end of our session, I do have another CUNY interview I'd like to play, Rita. Is that okay?
Sure. I
Great.
guess.
Let's
I don't know
see
what
it,
it
shall
is.
we? Yeah, it's a very nice one.
Poetry knows no age, and proving that point is a collection of poems by Rita Satz. Carol Ann Riddell recently sat down with her to talk about her book, There You Are.
It cups my elbow lightly, balancing me across the street. The hand that is light, firm, trying to say, you don't need me, but I'm here.
At 92 years old, Rita Satz discovered a voice she didn't know she had, the voice of a poet. Her just-published collection of poems, There You Are, is a moving tribute to love, loss, and the quiet beauty of ordinary days. After raising her family, Rita spent more than 20 years as a television news writer and producer, a familiar face to many of us in the business. But poetry wasn't something she considered. In fact, she only began writing recently as part of a workshop. Were you just hiding this poetry from us all these years?
I was hiding it from myself.
Okay.
Because it just never occurred to me. The only writing I really did was news writing, and that's as far from poetry as you can get it.
I can attest to that, Rita. I've known you in the news business for a long time now. I did not know that you had poetry inside of you.
Neither did I.
Rita's deep love affair with her husband comes through time and again in her poems.
I was very much in love with my husband.
Therapy at Grand Central with Eleanor?
Yes.
During World War II, so we married very young, and he died 8 years ago. So a lot of them reflect that.
For example, the poem Alone in Bed, which reads in part, "It's the worst time of day, the moment I wake up, open my eyes in the big, soft bed, soft with down comforters and piled up pillows, too big."
Every single morning when I wake up, I realize my husband isn't there. And it's 8 years, and it's every single morning. I hate waking up. I almost instinctively reach for him.
The poem Hands captures the circular pattern of our lives, from a parent caring for a child to that child caring for the parent.
Did my hand feel light, firm, when I took his small one in mine to walk him across the street? through traffic, through life. When was the moment he knew I knew he didn't need my hand, didn't want it, needed to swing his arms freely, uncurl his fingers? Now we take each other's hands because we want to.
And it's such a universal theme in the sort of shifting roles that we have in our lives.
It really is. You take care of your children, and then they want to take care of you.
Yeah.
And we resist it.
What would you say to those people who feel at various points in their lives, it's too late for me to start this over, I can't possibly do that now? You did this at the age of 92. You discovered you are, in fact, a poet.
I think the only thing I can say to people is try. I think the one thing that's worked for me very well is that I never started anything that I knew how to do. And I wasn't afraid to try.
Perhaps a lesson for all of us. Carol Ann Riddell for Arts in the City.
Nice interview with Carolyn, dear Rita.
Oh, I'd forgotten that. Thank you so much.
And in that interview, touched upon how you were a journalistic writer, and then you differentiated and tried something you didn't know how to do. Rita, I can't help but wonder if you did know how to write poetry, if it would have been as good. Maybe thank goodness you didn't know how.
Interesting thought.
Interesting thought, but it does touch us all. We do have one more poem in here that we haven't read yet. Maybe we could bring that up. Odyssey Kane. Oh, yes. It's Old Friend. We were talking about writing about aging, and we have one here. Let us bring up our last read. Old friends. What do they see when they look at each other? The young women they once were, dancing at parties with their slim, straight husbands, telling each other how pretty they looked in dresses they shopped for together, saying, "No, no, you take it. It looks better on you." Or do they look at each other and want to turn away? Cloud old days they don't want to remember. Bad days, the days someone failed, someone was sick, someone died. Do they see each other as they are now? Slow, stiff bodies, hiding the used-to-be lilting walks, telling each other in cracked voices, stories told too many times, longing for new ones.
Mhm.
Yes. I think a young person could know what it's like to age when they read one of your works, Rita.
Well, I hope I didn't depress them.
Well, you tell it like it is. And that's the reality. That's the truth, the innocence, it seems, in your writing. And I think that's why I respond to it, because it is nothing pretentious, as someone said. It's there.
Well,
No.
thank you.
Eleanor, did you have a question earlier? I wasn't sure.
No, it's just that I was a news writer also, wrote for magazines and in public relations. I sometimes search for words, but I always love to listen to Rita talking. To me, she doesn't sound like she's looking for anything that she can't find. And she just speaks wonderfully, as beautifully as her poetry. I really do enjoy your talking, Rita.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming from you, that's wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
Because you're so articulate.
Well, thank you. And I'm almost your age.
Getting there.
No one is almost my age.
Well, August 6th, I'll be celebrating my 94th birthday. So there you go.
Boy, God bless
Happy
you,
birthday.
Eleanor. Yes.
That last one, I belong to Hadassah. That's an organization of Jewish women mostly. And I was in my 20s and 30s, and we wore gowns, and I did the PR for our dances. And today, when we go, it's just like Rita's poem, instead of
May you be as articulate as Rita when you reach 100 years old. So,
I don't have it in me.
well, Rita said that when she wrote her poems and submitted to a publisher, it was like putting it in a bottle and putting it in the sea. She didn't expect a return. But this journalist had poems inside her, which she didn't find out until she wrote. Rita, you were asked about what poems you read, what forms of poems you read, and we started out talking about prose versus poetry. When you look at the poems of Edgar Allan Poe, they were very rhythmic, like the bells, 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 arriving and the chiming of the bells. I said he would have made a great drummer. And then there's the poetry, if you will, of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and where she has no concern for structure, but only for feeling and meaning. When you did read poetry, did you tend to gravitate more towards the freestyle writing, or did you kind of gravitate more towards that structured, rhyme?
My favorites were Emily Dickinson, Dorothy Parker, and Walt Whitman.
Yes.
My first book of poetry that was given to me by my uncle was Leaves of Grass. And I was very young. They were way beyond my comprehension, really, but somehow I responded to them. And I think both of them had a lack of pretentiousness that appealed to me. And I am still not comfortable with what to me is overgrown poetry, poetry that tries too hard. On the other hand, I'm a great admirer of the great poets who are able to bring up images that I never would be able to form. I simply don't have the genius that it takes to find these beautiful words to create beautiful poems.
Except that you did with your meanings.
Not at that level.
Yeah, I have a question.
The difference.
Rita, you've written about aging. Have you written anything about some positive aspects of aging? I'm not trying to say aging is all wonderful and fun by any means, but have you ever written anything about things that have gotten better or wisdom or whatever, good things about aging?
No.
Do you think there are any good things?
The short answer is no. I think because I started so late. By the time I was in my 90s, I don't think I saw anything really. I was lucky for what I still had, but I don't think I saw it as anything better than being younger, in terms of facilities.
Well, I love talking.
I hope
you
do. I hope those of you who are approaching old age do.
Approaching, yeah, right. Okay. All right. Okay.
We have more questions, Judy? Do we?
Well, I wasn't sure. Karen had another question or comment, but I think not. Yeah, obviously come in, Karen, if you'd like. Okay.
Well, Rita, you mentioned how you like Dickinson and Whitman, how they were able to convey without being pushy. So already I'm thinking about how I'm going to word my next email to you, where I might subtly suggest that you do another writing without being too pushy. So you're inspiring some creative writing in me.
Good.
So, Rita, thank you. With much, much affection and respect, I so appreciate you sharing these wonderful works. They touch everybody. And it was very nice of you to agree to talk. And I think everybody has enjoyed this. And I'm a fan. So, Rita Satz, thank you so much.
Thank you for wanting me.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, and thank you all for coming. It's been great. And thank you, David, for putting together this program of the 3 sessions with Rita and her wonderful career in politics and journalism, and then, of course, in poetry. May you go on to write more poems, and we really appreciate you so much. So
Thank you so much.